Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We have yet another great show planned for you tonight. With me in the studio is Glenn Wiech and Taylor Gaar of Move to Amend. Before we get started on tonight's topic of Move to Amend, we would like to do at least a brief election post-mortem. Being Democrats, we have to put a real emphasis on the word mortem. We got kicked around pretty good in the last election cycle, and we're kind of happy to see that one in the rearview mirror. But tonight's topic is really going to be money in politics, and so the recent election gives us a case in point to talk about money in politics and the pernicious aspects of the Citizens United decision and the McCutcheon v. FEC decision, both of which are allowing big money to enter politics and basically buy our electoral system. So Glenn, Taylor, thank you so much both for being here this evening. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on All Politics is Local. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having us, John.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Glenn, you're a local activist along with me. We do a lot of door knocking and a lot of politic and wholesale here in the Milford area.
Yes.
Your thoughts on the recent election?
Well, in general, I'd say that comparing this election to other elections, I've never had so many glossy flyers show up at my mailbox than I did in this election. It was just amazing how many flyers we got this time around. And those flyers are pretty expensive. This isn't a homegrown operation. This is high-class material.
Yeah, and one of the early flyers that came out, I remember the inside cover, blank. Nothing there. There was nothing on it. It's like, guys, you're paying for postage. It's amazing the amount of money that was spent on those.
How's that a metaphor for the kind of communication that's happening?
Exactly, yeah, and that's aside from the blank page, there was a lot of very dishonest material on those flyers, and it was really it's a shame to see that kind of politics happening locally.
Right.
Along the theme of this show, all politics being local.
Right. We've seen a lot of that over the years at the national level, where a soundbite will be taken out of context or a vote will be taken out of context. But this is really the first time we've seen this at the local level in particular.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what's going on there is we see that the Republicans certainly are getting bang for their buck when they go out and get things at the local level. We saw that in 2010 with all the gerrymandering that took place across the country. In the 2010 elections, what was it? 1 million more votes were cast for Democrats, and yet the Republicans maintained control of the House. This is what you can expect to see when local elections are bought and paid for by big money, and you end up with a gerrymandered system that keeps people in power that actually shouldn't be in power if the districting was fair, if redistricting was done on a fair and balanced basis.
True, and that won't change till at least 2020.
Right.
And in the meantime, the national election was the most expensive midterm election that we've ever seen. It just shows that there's just more money being poured into these elections.
Sure, and another case in point is our gubernatorial election right here in Massachusetts, what happened with Martha Coakley, right? She was outspent 2-1. The Republican Governors Association in particular came in, I think in the last week of the election, the RGA ran more ads, or spent more money on ads than Coakley spent in her entire campaign. In the final week, and she lost by a whisker, right? I mean, it's really money in politics that's corrupting the process.
And if you look at the state level, it's not even just the elections, the candidates themselves. I mean, look at the ballot referenda this year. The bottle bill, there was tremendous support for expansion of the bottle bill right up until the first week of September. What happened the first week of September? Well, there was a beverage lobby group, mostly funded by Coke and Pepsi from DC, who poured millions of dollars into ads. And in the course of 1 week, public opinion flipped from 60-40 in favor to 60-40 against. And there was a lot of dishonest messaging that came out as part of that, too.
Sure. And we also saw dishonest messaging on my pet issue, question 3. The repeal of the casinos. They never once, on the opposition to question 3, they never once mentioned casinos. They just talked about jobs. It's a jobs. We have to protect these Massachusetts jobs. But are they good jobs in casinos? You know, you look at a casino. What does a casino do to people who are addicted to gambling? You get people who waste their life savings. They'll pour out their own life savings. They'll ruin their kids' college education funds. They'll go through their own 401k. They'll they get into debt. They go and embezzle money. I mean, it's terrible. People commit suicide after losing everything in casinos. The way I look at it is a good job doesn't empty some child's college fund. A good job doesn't drive your neighbor to despair and suicide. Those are not good jobs. The last thing we need in this Commonwealth is casinos. One family ruined, one life ruined is just one too many in any state that calls itself a Commonwealth, and that really, it really puts the lie to the whole aspect of it.
And casinos really have a negative effect on the small businesses in the area too. So although they may provide some jobs from construction of the casino initially, and a lot of jobs for people in restaurants and bars and in the casino itself, ultimately what you'll see is a lot of the small businesses in the area close, those businesses that would directly compete with those bars and restaurants and other facilities that might be at the casino. So is it really a net gain of jobs? It's highly questionable.
Yeah, on the repeal of the casino deal front, we thought that we'd either break even or there'd be a net loss of jobs. You look at the studies that were done. Well, those studies were flawed. They talk about $1 billion is being spent in Connecticut. Well, in order to come up with that number, a professor went to Foxwoods on a holiday weekend and counted the Massachusetts license plates. And then he extrapolated that to the whole year and said, look, it's $1 billion. Well, no, it's not. How about a real study, please? That kind of stuff just wasn't done. And right here locally in the Worcester Norfolk Senate District, where my show, I'm proud to say, is on in 12 of the 14 towns, the Ryan Fatman and Dick Moore race. We saw, again, money in politics impacting us here. The Sutton Republican Town Committee had something like $82,000 to spend on this race.
Yeah.
There was a very interesting article on Go Local Worcester, came out I think yesterday or the day before, called Mass Fiscal Alliance and the Sale of Politics in Central Massachusetts. I urge all of my viewers to go take a look at golocalworcester.com. The article was written by Pat Sargent. Yeah, great article. Talks about the Fatman Moore race and what happened there. A lot of money was spent on that race, and it's a real shame to see somebody like Ryan Fatman going to Beacon Hill to represent us. There was, at the end of the article, it talked about how his father had funded a dishonest glossy mailer that went out right at the end of his run for state rep against Jen Callahan back in 2010. At the time, Fatman claimed, well, I don't know anything about that mailer. His father financed the mailer, but he didn't know anything about it. So it's really a shame to see him going to Beacon Hill to represent the district. I wish him a lot of luck in trying to bring anything back to the district, being a freshman senator and the party that doesn't control anything on Beacon Hill. We'll be watching. So I'm sure Ryan Fatman will be a topic of conversation on All Politics is Local at some point in the future. So let's get into Move to Amend. And Taylor, if you don't mind, why don't you give us a quick overview of what Move to Amend is all about and where we're going and where you're going, that is, and what we'd like to see happen.
Sure. No, I don't mind you using we. I think it is,
the more the merrier, right?
It's a collective effort, as democracy always is. No, Move to Amend is, so it's a coalition or a constellation of groups and individuals that came together actually as the Citizens United case was being argued. It was a group that came together out of a shared commitment to social and economic justice and ending corporate rule of our economy, our politics, and our society, and building a vibrant democracy that's actually representative of the people and accountable to the people. I guess the glib way to put it would be, we're a network of people who care about representative democracy, and think it would be awfully nice if we tried that sometime here in the U.S. But it's grown rapidly just in the last 4 years. So a lot of the founding groups had been doing this kind of democracy work for decades, researching the expansion of corporate power throughout history and sort of the erosion of our democratic process here. But it was the Citizens United case that sort of provided the impetus and galvanized lots of different groups and lots of different people from different walks of life saying, look, this has been a downhill slide for a long time, but my goodness, enough is enough. This has really just taken us over the cliff. And so in the last 4 years, we've grown to the point where there are something like 150 local Move to Amend affiliates around the country, just about every state. It's an all-volunteer group. There's a very small sort of team of national coordinators. Most of them don't get paid at all either, but the real work is being driven by local groups of citizens just coming together and organizing towards the primary goal of amending the Constitution, as the name implies, to say basically two things. You've heard it boiled down to corporations aren't people and money is not speech.
There you go.
And it's that does the whole issue a little bit of a disservice, because it's more complicated than that, and people hear sort of the phrase corporations aren't people, and they say, well, of course a corporation is a people. It's made up of is a person. It's made up of people. You know, a corporation has to be a person in order to be able to do business and sue and be sued. And so the better way to put it is that the rights protected under the Constitution are the rights of natural persons only. And that's an issue that really goes back more than 100 years. And Citizens United was sort of the latest in a long string of Supreme Court decisions granting just more and more power to these artificial entities and putting them in a place where they're subverting our sovereignty as citizens and our ability to effectively self-govern. And then the other half of it, as you mentioned, we're focusing on money and politics, and that goes back, again, beyond Citizens United, back to the 70s with a case called Buckley versus Vallejo, and then a Massachusetts case called the First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. And those cases were where the doctrine of sort of money equals speech really came about. And ever since then, we've seen campaign finance rules just struck down. You know, that was Citizens United was gutting major portions of what was known as the McCain-Feingold Act, right? This bipartisan effort to get some campaign finance reform. And after all the effort to try and put some limits on the way money was flowing into our elections, the Supreme Court came in and said, no, you know, sure you passed this through the democratic process, but we think that that's a violation of the First Amendment, and so we're gonna say you can't actually protect the integrity of elections by putting limits on the way money is raised and spent, even this outside money. You know, so you see the rise of super PACs and all of these new sort of creative legal mechanisms for just pouring dump truckloads of money into our elections. You've seen the amount of spending, especially outside spending, just absolutely skyrocket in the years since Citizens United.
Well, we also saw right here in the Worcester Norfolk Senate District, we saw the Mass Fiscal Alliance. Now, they supported Ryan Fatman's amendment at some point or another where he was trying to limit unions in the amount of money that unions can donate for elections, trying to limit them to the same as a person, like $500 or $1,000, whatever the limits are for people. And yet the Mass Fiscal Alliance seems to have found a gaping hole in our campaign finance laws, and they've donated all kinds of money. Thousands of dollars to help Ryan Fatman get elected.
Yeah,
You know, way more than any individual person could have possibly donated, and that's the pernicious aspects of money in politics. So right here in our district, we had a ballot question on the recent ballot in November that passed. Glenn, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So let's take a step back and say why we had the ballot measure in the first place. I think everybody agrees that there's too much money in politics. But we wanted to get the core ideas of what we're trying to do in front of voters. That would be the first thing we wanted to accomplish, to let people know that somebody was trying to do something about all this money in politics, and that really as an educational effort, we're trying to show people that the only way to really solve the problem, to overrule the court, Supreme Court, is to pass a constitutional amendment. And so that was part of what we wanted to accomplish. Mm-hmm. The second thing we wanted to accomplish is to demonstrate to our representatives that there is a lot of support amongst the public for limiting campaign spending. And as it turns out in our district here, the 10th Worcester District, we saw that 73% of voters voted for the ballot measure.
Okay.
So it's non-binding, but it does make a statement that people want
wide
something
support.
done.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now we also have a graphic for this that shows where the ballot question was asked in the last couple of years. Tyler, if you could pull up picture 1 or picture A onto the screen. There we have our graphic. We put your move to amend logo up there for you, Taylor. Glenn, if you want to talk a little bit about what the ballot question districts are, how the map really shows where the support is.
Sure. So we've gone through 2 rounds of these ballot measures, the first in 2012 and then in 2014. It looks like we've got about 60% of the state covered. This time around in 2014, we did 18 districts. So we're starting to branch out further and further away from the core population centers and trying to get it on the ballot in more towns. So it has been a good effort as far as reaching more people.
Do we know how the question did? Did it pass in all of those districts, or did it pass in most of them? Do we have an idea of that?
Here's the amazing thing, John. Every single district, and that's true of not just our efforts here in Massachusetts, but every time that this has ended up on the ballot, from the local level up to statewide level. Colorado and Montana in 2012 had statewide referenda where voters voted overwhelmingly. It's not even just a majority, it's a supermajority in every case. So in 2012, it was in front of about a third of the voters in the Commonwealth, and it passed in every district with an average of 79% in favor, and that's about the same numbers that we saw this year. It was in the 70s.
Terrific, terrific. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about, you brought some graphics with you as well that we've put together.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I wanted to provide a little bit of sort of the backstory. Amending the Constitution is a dramatic step to take. A lot of people sort of blush at the idea because it's the sort of fix that you reserve for situations where there's something fundamentally broken, and it really comes down to places where the system that we have has not been living up to the ideals on which it was founded. And the amendments that we've had over the years have been to sort of address those discrepancies between what we are brought up learning that the country is all about, and what the founders envisioned, what they spoke about, and the reality of it. And so we've had amendments to expand the rights of people and include more and more people into this category of who are we, the people, with rights.
Mm-hmm.
And today, I think we face a situation that most people know intuitively is broken and is getting worse. But it doesn't have to be just a gut feeling. We actually have quite a bit of data to back that up. And so if you'll put up graphic C, one of the most striking bits of research to come out in recent years was this year a study was published that is the most comprehensive look at public policy that's ever been done here in America. And it was these researchers, Martin Gillens at Princeton and Benjamin Page at Northwestern. What they did was they went back through several decades and they looked at all range of public policy issues, and they compared it with survey data from voters from all over the spectrum. And what they found was this depressing flat line here.
That we're
what it
looking at
actually shows you is that whether 10% of average citizens are in favor of a particular proposal, a particular policy, or 90% are in favor of it, it really doesn't make any statistical difference in whether or not that is likely to actually become law. Now that may not seem surprising, or it may seem like just a fluke of how the system works, but what they did was, this is when you have factored out the preferences of the economic elite. Mm-hmm. This is just average citizens, and if you'll switch now to graphic D, when they look at the economic elites and what they want, you see an incredible responsiveness of our public policy to the wishes of the wealthiest Americans. And then you look at interest
So basically, if we're looking at this correctly, the economic elite's preferences on the left-hand side there, if close to 0% of them are against it, or I'm sorry, if close to 0 are in favor of it, there's no chance at all that it's going to happen.
Right.
On the other hand, if 90 to 100% of them are in favor of it, there's a huge chance that it's going to happen.
Right, and it's still no guarantee. I mean, the way legislation works is they say there's one way to pass a bill, there are 1,000 ways to kill it, right? So, but what you see is when the interests of the economic elite and the interests of these sort of lobbying groups, special interest groups, are not in alignment with the interests of the public as a whole, the public doesn't get what it wants or what it needs. Right?
Okay.
And their conclusion, they didn't use the word oligarchy, but that is essentially what the conclusion that they came to, is that we don't live, functionally speaking, in the representative democracy that we have been brought up to believe we have. We live in a system that is dominated by and controlled by an economic elite, and the word for that is oligarchy.
Yep.
So that made a real splash when that came out this year. And that's not the only data point. You look at the abysmally low approval ratings of Congress. You look at the record inability to get any legislation passed. It's obvious that Congress has become broken. And we at Move to Amend, we feel really strongly that part of the reason or the main reason that Congress is broken right now is that the link between representatives and their constituents is broken, and instead they're now sort of hooked up to the money IV.
To the money machine. Yeah.
And Lawrence Lessig, who teaches at Harvard Law and speaks prolifically about money and politics, has done a great job of sort of pinpointing a really important place where we've gone awry here, which is Madison wrote in Federalist 52 that Congress is meant to be dependent on the people alone. And it's that dependency that has gotten skewed now, with the fact that they have to spend half of their time or more dialing for dollars. They don't even get the chance to govern and attend to the real needs of their constituents, even if they wanted to.
Sure.
So that's just a look at the way that money flooding into the system has swamped the democratic process.
Right, and we see things like Sheldon Adelson will hold a conference for nominees for the Republican Party, and they all flock to him to kiss his ring and try to get whatever money they can.
Yeah.
The Koch brothers are another case in point of big oil money, and it's affecting the debate on climate change. I mean, climate change is certainly real. It's here. It's happening. We're seeing it right now. Superstorm Sandy. Had Superstorm Sandy struck Boston instead of New Jersey, huge sections of Boston would have been underwater. Huge. And we should rightly tremble in fear for the next one, because sooner or later it's going to hit and it's going to be devastating. We have to do something about climate change, but again, money in politics is preventing that. We talked a little bit before the show. Go right ahead. We talked a little bit before the show about the climate change denial industry and compared them to the tobacco industry, right?
Yeah. And as a science teacher, so what I do when I'm not volunteering my time with Move to Amend during the day, I teach 5th and 6th grade science, and actually, coincidentally, today I was just talking about climate change with my 6th graders, and we were looking at maps of Boston. There's this great interactive tool online where you can watch, well, if the sea levels rise 1 foot, what part of your neighborhood is going to be underwater?
Sure.
And I teach in East Boston, and it's an area that's very
susceptible,
low-lying, very vulnerable. So yeah, as someone who teaches that and cares about it, I appreciate you acknowledging the climate change is real. It'd be nice if we could get people in Congress to do the same.
Well, I actually work in the solar power industry,
Oh,
so
yeah.
this topic of climate change is very near and dear to my heart. I feel like I'm trying to make a difference, and it's gratifying. It is great work to do, and I really enjoy it. So. I'm glad that you're teaching science. My science teachers in my grammar school years were my favorite people. So I tried to pay attention in class. I hope your kids are paying attention as well.
I don't think any of them are watching this, or I'd turn to the camera and tell them to get back to the
Get back to homework.
They're great though, and it's a really fun job to have.
So let's talk a little bit about the denial industry and what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're talking about climate change or the health effects of tobacco historically, what it takes is just muddying the waters, right? You don't have to actually present a cogent case that something is or is not true. You just have to create uncertainty,
Yep.
right? And it's sort of similar to the way that money influences elections and influences policy. I talked about how money can't guarantee that policy will get made, but it can guarantee that policy won't get made, right? And in terms of elections, you see people point to cases where candidates have been outspent and and have still won. They say, Karl Rove spent hundreds of millions of dollars in 2012 and lost all these races. So that proves that money doesn't actually buy elections. Well, the bigger issue is that money determines who can run in the first place, right? If you don't have the backing of a tremendous number of deep-pocketed people, then you're not a viable candidate. And then it also determines what issues are or are not on the table. So right now, effective action to combat climate change is not on the table, at least in terms of legislation. The president's doing what he can now, but
through executive action.
Yeah,
Which makes Ted Cruz crazy. Ted Cruz thinks that he's ruling by diktat, was what he said yesterday. But then again, Ted Cruz also said net neutrality is Obamacare for the internet,
Right.
proving that Ted Cruz doesn't know what he's talking about.
the scary thing about that is that, at least on most issues, maybe he really is just clueless about net neutrality, but Ted Cruz is a phenomenally intelligent person. And so while I chalk a lot of people's positions up to cluelessness, what scares me about him is he does know exactly what he's talking about and what he does.
Yeah, he's argued cases in front of the Supreme Court, so
Sure.
he's no lightweight. He knows what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And at Harvard, he was known as being one of the best debaters in the entire country.
Well, we also saw a recent decision by the State Board of Education in Texas, not actually by the State Board of Education, but by the textbook publishers, that the SBOE in Texas tries to influence. There was climate change denial was written into some science textbooks by, I think, Rand McNally. What's the other big?
So the two that have recently changed their positions were McGraw-Hill and Pearson.
Okay.
Right.
And I think it did. Oh, was it Pearson? I thought it was Rand McNally as well. I knew that there was a.
It may have been.
I think there was a victory yesterday where they also pulled. I may be wrong. I may have imagined that when I was reading.
But yeah, I mean, we started with the postmortem. There are times when it really feels like we're living in dark days, and so it's wonderful to be able to find these points of hope where rationality and sanity prevails, right?
Yes.
And when popular pressure saying, look, this is not an appropriate type of thing to be inserting into a science textbook, or a history textbook, when that pressure actually makes a difference and you get people to back off on.
Yeah. It's bad enough what they did to the history textbooks with Jefferson a couple of years ago. They tried to basically eliminate Jefferson from the history of the United States. Jefferson had a lot to say about the separation of church and state, and that's something that they don't like to talk about because that undermines their case that we're a theocracy here. So, so we do have to watch out, like you say, for these little points of hope where things can turn around maybe for us a little bit.
Yeah.
So
There are a lot of ballot measures that did very well, even in red states, where minimum wage was on the ballot and it passed overwhelmingly. Alaska passed the marijuana legalization.
there was actually ballot measures in Massachusetts about marijuana legalization, which I didn't know about. They were in, of course, state rep districts like your ballot question was as well. Where I guess it's relatively easy to get them on 250 signatures and you can get them on the ballot, right? The marijuana initiatives, there was two of them, two different questions were asked, and they all passed overwhelmingly. The first one said, should marijuana be legalized, taxed, and regulated like alcohol? Those passed with over 70% support, virtually everywhere that it was asked. And then the other one said, should marijuana be legalized and sold like produce or herbs, thyme, oregano, and those passed with well over 60% support. So very interesting to see that stuff going on, and like you said, on the state level in Alaska, they've now legalized marijuana. Wasn't there a meteorologist in Alaska who dropped the mic on her show one day? I don't know if you guys saw that on YouTube. I saw it a couple of months ago, where she said that she's leaving the leaving her job as a meteorologist at the TV station to become a full-time marijuana grower.
Yes.
And she basically dropped the mic on the set. It was really it was a nice moment. I think she actually swore a little bit too.
The dream of struggling workers all over the place.
all over this great country of ours. I think
It's amazing how quickly the tide is shifting on marijuana. I mean, public opinion was split and actually leaning against it for such a long time. There are a couple of social issues, that and gay marriage, where we're really just in a decade or two, we're seeing remarkable movement and shift in public opinion. And it may be getting to the point where marijuana is one of the few things that can really bring voters together in such large numbers.
Sure.
But the only other one that we've seen so consistently is people rejecting the corrupting influence of money in politics.
Well, here's hoping that there's some hope down the road that we'll get these things passed. As far as marijuana is concerned, I wonder if anybody's going to bring back Reefer Madness. Perhaps it's about time for a remake of that classic.
Right.
I don't know if you guys ever saw it. I saw it in college. Of course, we got good and stoned beforehand. But very, very propagandistic movie. Such incredible propaganda to make the case against marijuana. Which is something that people have been using for thousands of years for all of its palliative effects. There's research been done, I think 4000 BC, it was found in China that the people in China were using marijuana for headache remedy and such. So it's really, it's kind of silly for us to what was the saying? Man-made alcohol, God-made marijuana. Who do you trust?
And we hear about new medical breakthroughs with marijuana all the time, too.
Sure.
That it shrinks tumors.
Yep.
Yep. Recently, we heard that.
The brain tumors, they will shrink tumors, and it has all kinds. There's also been research done. They wondered why people who only smoke marijuana weren't getting lung cancers like tobacco smokers do. And then they found out that even among tobacco smokers who also smoke marijuana, they weren't getting lung cancer with the same frequency as people who just smoke tobacco. And it turns out that marijuana can help shrink cancer tumors. And so, there's a lot of good stuff out there on that topic, and I'm heartened to see public opinion shifting. So, but back to our purpose for being here today, Citizens United. Yet another couple of graphics.
Yeah, well, actually, your marijuana is a good segue there, because if you look at the history of marijuana prohibition, it didn't come about because of medical research saying it should be outlawed, or because people weren't using it and enjoying it. It came about because of sort of political, economic pressures and xenophobia in that case. But these days we are seeing victories at the local level with marijuana and with a number of other issues. And it'll be interesting to see how some specific victories that we saw in this last round of elections play out when it comes to the issue of sovereignty. So we saw in Texas, one of the most heavily fracked towns in Texas decided to pass a ban on fracking. The voters put it to a referendum and voted on it.
Just to be clear, you're talking about natural gas extraction by fracturing shale in order to release the natural gas.
Yes,
when you say
hydraulic
fracking.
fracturing.
Hydraulic fracturing,
right.
Yeah.
Which has, the science is just starting to really come in and get more conclusive about this, but it's starting to be linked to earthquakes, increased seismic activity in places where there were no earthquakes before, and certainly there is methane leakage whenever this is happening. And anyway, so a lot of harmful effects, and there's this somewhat disputed claim about just how much groundwater contamination is going on, but it's almost certain that there is some. And so voters decided to say, look, we've had enough of this. And similarly in Richmond, California, the voters there pushed back against this effort by the fossil fuel industry there. I think it's Chevron, right?
Yeah.
So Chevron has this big refinery, and they were trying to basically eliminate any local oversight of their activities there when it came to pollution and that sort of thing. And they poured a bunch of money into trying to get pro-Chevron candidates elected, I think at the city council level.
Yeah.
But voters pushed back against that, and Richmond, sometime in the last couple of years, I don't remember exactly what the details of the initiative were, but they have basically asserted the right to local self-government, saying, look, we can determine, when things are harmful to our community, we can determine whether or not we want them to go on here. So it brings us to this issue of sovereignty, and I want to go sort of back to the founding of the country and look at the Constitution and the blueprint that it laid out. And this will go with graphic 5, or graphic
E.
E, yeah.
Tyler, if you would pull up graphic E for us, here we have it.
So the Constitution starts with the words "we the people," right? Those are the first 3 words, and the whole idea, the whole basis of our representative democratic republic in the Constitution is that the people are sovereign. You know, sovereignty means the authority to rule, and democracy actually comes from the Attic Greek demos, meaning the people, and kratia, meaning rule. So democracy literally means that the people rule. And what the Constitution established is that we have these rights. Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence that they are inalienable. You know, they're inherent to who we are. They don't depend on government granting us the rights. They're part of the human condition, right? And from the people who are sovereign, from the consent of the governed, comes the power of government, right? Government is whatever we come together and say it is.
Right. Well, isn't it Article or Amendment 9 that says that all rights not enumerated are reserved to the people?
To the people.
Right. The Constitution is really limiting the power of government, not limiting people.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And even when the Constitution was passed, it would not have gotten ratified. There were a number of states, including Massachusetts, who pushed back, absent the enumeration of specific rights for citizens, right, for individuals. And so that's how we got the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. And so from the consent of the governed comes the power of government, and then on down the line, government uses that power delegated to it by the people to create something called the corporation. And corporations are not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. But what happened was during the debates as the Constitution was being drafted, there was basically general agreement that states which create corporations and which govern them through the chartering documents that create them would effectively have the ability to keep corporations in check. At that point, Americans, the colonists and the revolutionaries were tremendously leery of corporations. The corporation was not a common vehicle for economic activity. The corporation that was fresh in the minds of the revolutionaries was the East India Company.
Sure, the tea company, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
and so what happened in the run-up to the revolution was the British East India Company, which was basically the first multinational corporation. That and the Dutch East India Company throughout the 1600s, they grew into these behemoths which had power that rivaled the states which created them. You know, they did things like coining their own money, imprisoning and executing convicts, establishing their own colonies and negotiating treaties and waging wars. The British East India Company at one point had a standing army that was 2.5 times the official British army, times the size of the British army. And so what happened was, eventually, in their sort of quest for endless empire, they had stretched themselves thin and they were financially strapped, and they happened to be very intertwined with the members of Parliament. There was a lot of sort of crossover in the financial interests of members of the board of the company, the shareholders.
This is sounding very familiar.
Right? It's amazing how history repeats itself. But so Parliament's solution to this problem when the East India Company was strapped for cash was, okay, well, we will carve out a monopoly for you over the tea trade to the Americas. And so not only was it the only company that was allowed to bring the tea across the ocean, once it got here, it could only be distributed by hand-picked consignees, by the British government with close ties to the East India Company. And so it was essentially cutting out all of the local businesses. It was cutting out all the small merchants from the whole process. And that was part of the tipping point that led to people like John Hancock throwing their lot in with these kind of intellectual revolutionaries. And we know the story of the Boston Tea Party. Everyone has heard it. What we miss a lot of times when we are taught that story is that it wasn't just a symbolic political protest against the crown. It was a strategic economic direct action. That wasn't official British government tea that was on the 3 ships that they boarded. These were ships of the British East India Company. It was company tea that they specifically targeted and threw over. So the revolutionaries that founded our country weren't just rebelling against a tyrannical king. It was actually the interlocking power of this mighty state and the corporate machinery that was owned by that state's wealthiest merchants and was getting this incredible favoritism. So this giant multinational corporation, this vessel of concentrated economic power, was working hand in glove with the government that was structuring the economy and setting all the rules.
And we're seeing the corrupting influence of money in politics.
Right. And so the founders were incredibly skeptical of corporations. There weren't very many corporations at the time of sort of the birth of the country. And those corporations that did exist were incredibly tightly regulated. There was a comprehensive regime of restrictions that were placed on them through the states, through the charters that created them. Corporations couldn't own stock in other corporations. They were for specific purposes. They were for limited amounts of time. And shareholders were actually liable for business debts and for damages. And all of this was a product of the fact that the corporation is an artificial entity that is brought into existence by the state government. Right? It does not exist until this charter, this piece of paper is signed. And so yes, there are people who make up a corporation, but it's really this, it's in law school, they refer to it as a legal fiction, right? It's a construct. And so what has happened over time, first throughout the 1800s, they went after these specific restrictions on them. And in the state legislatures, in these backdoor deals, kind of one by one, they bribed and lobbied their way into getting these restrictions lifted. And so throughout the 1800s, corporate power sort of grew. But then it was in the Gilded Age, speaking of times that are reminiscent of our own. The Gilded Age was this time of incredible disparity, great wealth, great poverty, lots of corruption in government. The robber barons had built their fortunes on the backs of their workers when there were no protections for working people. Yep. And it was during that time that the Supreme Court entered its first phase of real pro-corporate activism. And there's a case that has become sort of famous recently as people have gone back and dug through the records and found out what actually happened. This case called Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad. And this was the first time that the Supreme Court recognized that corporations had constitutional rights.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, it was actually a clerk
right.
who wrote this summary of the opinion?
So it's this incredible sort of bizarre quirk, this episode in our legal history. Yeah, John C. Bancroft Davis was a former president of the New York and Newburgh Railroad Company, and he was working as court reporter, so his job was to write down the decisions. And the railroad company that was arguing the case, it wasn't about big ideas. It was actually a very narrow technical matter about county fences and taxes. And but one of the arguments that the corporate lawyers for the railroad company wanted to make was, oh, well, we're protected by the 14th Amendment. The railroad corporation is protected by the 14th Amendment, and these taxes violate the 14th Amendment.
Now, the 14th is...
So there's the tragic irony of this being sort of the foothold that they got.
The 14th is for equal protection under the law, right? Yes.
So it was passed in the wake of the Civil War to protect flesh and blood human beings who had struggled for so long under the yoke of slavery, who now, having been freed from slavery, still weren't being recognized as human beings, right? Yep. And so the 14th Amendment was passed to extend equal protection to these freed slaves, and instead, if you look at the record, what happened over the next few decades was the vast majority of cases brought under the 14th Amendment were on behalf of corporations, saying, oh, our corporation gets equal protection. And so what Davis did was he added it into sort of the description at the top of the case. The justices never ruled on it. It was not part of their decision, but he said, oh, well, during, at the beginning of oral argument, the Chief Justice said, we don't want to hear argument about that. We all assume that corporations are entitled to the 14th Amendment, which was, if he actually said that, it was an incredible statement for him to make, to sort of sweep it aside, because it was fundamental constitutional question that had not been ever ruled on before, or had not been resolved in that way. In fact, companies had been bringing these cases saying, oh, 14th Amendment protection, and they'd been struck down. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that was sort of the hook that the lawyers needed, and that was the first big chapter in corporate constitutional rights. But it's really a long story that there's the waxing and waning of corporate power as people's movements have risen up and banded together to actually assert the rights and the power of ordinary citizens.
Yep.
The next real episode that we saw where there was a resurgence of corporate power, specifically through judicial activism, was during the 70s, and the charge was led by this man named Lewis Powell. And even though he was a Supreme Court justice, a lot of people have never heard of him, but he was a tobacco lawyer from Richmond. He was a corporate lawyer, worked for Philip Morris, and in 1971, he wrote a memo outlining a battle plan for the Chamber of Commerce to coordinate this massive assault through creating think tanks and influencing policy and decision making, but also through the courts. And he actually called for an activist-minded Supreme Court, which would create rights for corporations. Had a friend on the Chamber of Commerce. This got circulated to business leaders
It was called the Powell
secret,
Memo, right?
The Powell Memo.
Yep.
And lo and behold, within a year, Nixon had appointed him to be on the Supreme Court. Never divulged in his hearings that he had been advocating for judicial activism on the Supreme Court.
Right, and never divulged that this Powell Memo existed.
Right.
Right.
When he got to the Supreme Court, the robe that he took with him was actually presented to him by Philip Morris. Which we wouldn't know except for the racketeering and conspiracy litigation that was successfully brought against the tobacco companies by the Department of Justice. This came out in the sort of discovery, the fact finding. But so once Powell got on the court, he ruled in a bunch of cases expanding the rights of corporations, and we've gotten to the point today where you look at that blueprint that we laid out earlier, and let's go ahead and look at graphic F. Are we
Graphic
up to
F.
now?
Graphic F. Yes.
Yeah. So once corporations who have over the years gained the privilege of limited liability and perpetual life, once they now have the same constitutional rights that you and I have, it really subverts this entire idea of sovereignty. It takes away our role to actively self-govern, and it puts corporations up there.
Okay, so corporations are now sovereign with rights, and the government is representative of the corporations with their duties, and the people are nowhere to be seen. That's scary.
It's what we're seeing, and it happens through taking governments to court and getting laws overturned by claiming that they are a violation of these corporations' constitutional rights, and it also happens through what doesn't get legislated and what doesn't get regulated, as city governments, state governments. Regulating agencies say, look, we can't afford to do this. We're going to get challenged in court. We're going to have to go to all the trouble to defend this. And so it's had an incredible chilling effect on regulations that would try to keep corporate activity in check for the sake of the public interest.
Okay.
It's a depressing state of affairs. So let's go back to the wins that we are.
So well, where do we go from here? That's we're running down now. We've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
So basically, where do we go from here? For one thing that I need to get out right now, if my viewers want to find out more about Move to Amend, do you have a website, Facebook page, that kind of stuff? How would my viewers find out more?
Absolutely. So nationally, there's a page, movetoamend.org. We also, if you go to GBMTA, so that's Greater Boston movetoamend.org, gbmta.org, that'll take you to our local affiliate for the Boston area, which includes a lot of work being done sort of on the Metro West side of Boston. We're in the process of maybe forming a local affiliate here in the area, but there's also, for the recent ballot initiatives, we created a website called voteyesfordemocracy.org.
Okay.
That would be a great place to go for a lot of this information.
Okay, and in post-production, I'll put this up on graphics underneath your image there, so that my viewers can get all the full spelling, et cetera, and be able to go out and see what's going on there. Where is Move to Amend going? What's the plan?
Right, so the main organizing goal is a constitutional amendment to say that the rights protected in the Constitution are the rights of natural persons only. So so not artificial entities like corporations, and to say that money is not speech, right, and that money raised and spent on elections can and should be regulated to try to protect access to the political process for everyone and not just the wealthiest who are bankrolling everything. And so a constitutional amendment basically takes a movement, right? And this, we've seen a movement starting to spread like wildfire, starting to really build from the grassroots up across the country. At this point, 16 states have gone on record calling for an amendment along these lines. Massachusetts in 2012 passed a resolution. It was unanimous in the House, and it was a vote of 35-1 in the Senate, calling on Congress for an amendment. Congress is not likely to do anything about this anytime soon. It should not come as any surprise to people.
One of my favorite sayings, if pro is the opposite of con, is Congress the opposite of progress. And,
That's great.
It sure does seem that way.
Right. So what do? Well, it turns out that the founders, in their tremendous wisdom, put into the Constitution an alternate route to amending it. Generally, a constitutional amendment has to come out of Congress. It gets proposed, it gets voted on. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate have to say yes. Then it gets sent out to the states.
To ratification.
Has to be ratified
2/3,
by
again.
3/4 of the
3/4.
states. So
Okay,
38 states.
Yep.
But they thought, wait a second, what if Congress is the problem that needs to be fixed? And so there's sort of a backdoor, and it's a convention under
And Article
Article
5. Yep.
It allows 2/3 of the states to apply for a convention to propose amendments. Now, this has never been done at the federal level. It's been done 233 times to amend state constitutions, and they've all been sort of successful, and there hasn't been any sort of like, oh, let's throw out the Constitution and rewrite it. Sometimes people balk at the idea of a convention because it's unprecedented at the federal level, but there's a lot of historical context to say that could be effective. Even if we didn't get to a convention, though, what a convention has served as in the past is pressure to get a reluctant Congress to act.
Yep.
So we wouldn't have direct election of senators right now if it weren't for a movement just like the one that we're currently
Right,
involved
the
in.
17th Amendment, which gave us direct election of senators. Prior to the 17th, they were selected by their state legislators,
Exactly.
correct?
It was a system widely viewed as systemically corrupt and undemocratic, exactly like the problems that we're trying to address today.
Right.
And
that was almost like the House of Lords, right? I mean,
exactly.
yeah.
And the Senate wasn't going to do anything about it. They weren't going to change
Sure.
the way that they got there. Even though the House had actually passed multiple bills for proposing a constitutional amendment. So what happened was activists went to the states and they started working at the local and state level, building this grassroots pressure. They got to within one state of the threshold that would have triggered a convention. The Senate said, you know what? Well, we're going to take this after all.
Maybe we could
we'll take
do
over
that,
from
yeah.
here. Sure. So, out of the 16 states that have called on Congress for an amendment, just this year, Vermont and California have both upped the ante by saying, all right, you know what? We're calling
We'll
for
support
a
an Article
convention.
5.
So, that's actually our next goal here in Massachusetts is we're going to be with a coalition of other groups. We're going to be helping to introduce and rally support for a bill that would put Massachusetts on record calling for a convention as well.
Awesome.
But in the meantime, it takes education, it takes movement building, it takes people reaching out to each other and saying, you know what, the system is broken, but it doesn't have to stay this way.
Right. Well, you know, this show will go out to 12 towns across the Worcester-Norfolk Senate District, but it's the type of topic that really applies both statewide and nationally. Grab a copy. You can shoot copies of the DVD, send it out anywhere.
Absolutely.
I'll load it up onto my Peg Media account, so it'll be available for anybody to download. They'll have to pay 99 cents to download it, and then they can show it. This is, I make my show freely available for anybody who wants it. So absolutely, I would love to see this go out far and wide. I will put it on YouTube. I have a YouTube account that allows me to put up videos that are longer than 15 minutes. So I will put this on YouTube. I'll be certainly send you the link. I'd be happy to have you link it from movetoamend.org.
Wonderful.
Or wherever else you want to link it from. This has been a great discussion. We have about 5 minutes left. Tyler, are we on 5 minutes, 4 minutes? I goofed on the clock. About 5 minutes left. So anything else that you wanted to talk about, that you wanted to cover?
Well, if people are interested in knowing more, we've got not only the resources on the website, but we've actually put together, just a few of us who volunteer here in Massachusetts have put together a workshop that runs an hour to an hour and a half. We can actually make it shorter if need be, but we're happy to go around and deliver it to any audience.
Okay.
We've done a lot of presentations at Unitarian churches, at local sort of community groups, and we detail we go into a lot more detail with the history of corporate constitutional rights and look at some of the data of money in politics and what the effects of it are.
Right. I think one of those was recently held in Franklin. Was going on in Franklin a couple of months ago, or maybe a month and
in
a half?
Franklin, actually, it was a discussion by Jeff Clements, who
that's
was
right.
talking about his new book
Yeah.
and the current state of affairs.
Okay.
But we did have one here in Milford, I want to say in the May or June timeframe.
Okay. Well, maybe it's time for Greater Blackstone Valley Dems to do another one of those. We could always grab the Granite Room over in the library and have Move to Amend come in and give us a discussion, see how many people we can turn out for that. The Granite Room holds 80, 90 people, so hopefully we could fill that room up and
I'd be happy to.
Be awesome.
get some of that stuff done. Some of the other stuff that we've done recently, we had Robert Reich's film Inequality for All. We did a showing of that at the library. I'd be happy to do another showing of that. So viewers, my email address is on at the end of the show. So viewers, get in touch if you're interested to see something along those lines. So this has been an absolutely fantastic show. I'm really happy with the results, and I hope that this goes out far and wide.
Thanks so much for having us on, John.
Yes,
You're
thank
very welcome. This has been just an awesome program. I'm really psyched. This was a good one. This one rivals my interview with Don Berwick. I had Don on over the summer. That was I was proud of that one. That was my best episode, I thought. But this one's pretty good. This has been a great discussion. And Taylor, you're very knowledgeable on the topic. You're better than I am, and I thought that I was good. So.
Well, all it takes is a passion for wanting to learn more about it.
Sure.
I'm in my 4th year of teaching, and that takes up more time than I feel like I have to give in the first place. But this is, I wasn't politically engaged. I had given up on the hope of any sort of change outside of individual relationships, and it was the Occupy movement that I watched the way it flowered, and I said, wait a second, people are connecting the dots here. There's actually energy around fixing the fundamental flaws at the heart of the system here. And I said, well, I can't not do this.
Right. It's something. It's we're in a labor of love here. So we love our democracy and want to protect it, and certainly it's being bought and sold. We see so many voter ID laws being passed across the country. Registered voters need to show ID to vote. But Mr. Moneybags, you want to buy the election? We don't need to see your ID. We don't care where the money comes from. Just get that money in here so that we can run our ads and try to win the election whatever way we can. So you've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Thanks so much for tuning in. Good night, everybody. We're done.